Welcome to DMs Discuss. I'm Mike.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Scott.
Welcome to DMs Discuss, where this week DMs are going to discuss DM tools. We'll be walking through our favorite VTTs, what we use for like character sheets, generators, and some random stuff that we utilize as part of our tool set as DMs.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll start with VTTs. And if you haven't heard of that, or you must be under a D&D rock, because VTT is virtual tabletop. And if you're playing online, one of these is definitely a necessity. Virtual tabletops essentially are a way to display things like map, tokens, way for DMs to track health and kind of run encounters in a visual virtual tabletop. One of the more popular ones is Roll20. There's a lot of D&D games, and this one's been around for quite a while. Does kind of have a really old interface, and I think lately it's gotten a little bit laggier and a little bit janky, but for the most part, this has been a very popular VTT, and it has run a lot of D&D games.
Yeah, like you said, the UI is definitely super dated. You can tell that it's been around for a long time because it looks like it was built in the early 2000s. That said, it's good for what you need. It has a free option, so you don't need to subscribe. You don't need to like pay an exorbitant amount of money to run your games through it. If you just want to upload your own map assets, you want to run your own stuff, you can. So I found it super useful. But if you do want to pay them a little bit of money, you can subscribe, and you can actually. They are partnered with Wizards, so you can buy modules through it. And makes running games that are from pre-mades super, super easy.
What do you get with those modules?
Oh, everything. Like I purchased the Curse of Strahd when I started running my Wednesday night game, and it came literally every map that is in the game came preloaded with all of the encounters already on them. So you can add stuff to it. Like if you want to balance the encounter, you can add certain creatures, remove things, you can do stuff like that. But it comes with the from the book encounters on the maps already for you to use. So it's crazy good.
Yeah, definitely being able to purchase the pre-existing content is always a really good feature to have in any VTT for someone who's looking to just run an adventure that has been officially published. It'll always be a huge time saver.
Yeah, for sure. I think starting as a new DM, I jumped into Roll20 kind of immediately. That was my VTT of choice. Granted, when I started looking into VTTs, there wasn't a lot of options out there. I think there's a few ones that have come to the foreground now. But Roll20, it has a bit of a learning curve. Like it took me a few hours to learn how to work with the different layers and where to get tokens and upload tokens from. And, that does kind of have a library of, like tree images and cave images. So, as a starting DM, I think one of the things that was fun for me was building a map. Like actually, throwing some trees on a map and putting kind of enemies hidden on the token layer, etc. So even though there was a learning curve, I found it was kind of a fun tabletop to use without even purchasing anything and kind
Yeah,
of
for
going from
sure.
scratch.
And if you do want to purchase stuff, like I said, another thing that isn't the virtual tabletop, but that I found super useful for me was all the keyboard shortcuts that you can use for that make it infinitely easier to use. So there is a learning curve to starting to use it, but what I did was buy a Stream Deck and then bind all of the keys for like moving stuff between layers, adding turns, all that stuff. I bound all of that onto the Stream Deck, so it's like all one button for me to push, so I don't have to try to remember all the keyboard shortcuts for Roll20.
Yeah, I think as a beginner tabletop, I think it's a decent option. It like I said, it does have that little learning curve, but overall, I mean, if it starts getting even jankier, I'd probably hesitate to recommend it because it's been a little weird lately. But overall, I think it's a good beginner choice, and it's not too difficult.
Yeah, for sure. And it integrates with a lot of stuff really easily. But Chris, you've been running on a little bit of a different setup recently. The game that you run for us is on Astral. Do you want to talk about that one a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Astral's one of the newer ones out there. I think it's only been out for 2 or 3 years. And so it is missing a few of the features that Fantasy Grounds has. It's like being able to switch between layers isn't there yet, but they've been adding new features really, really fast to it. And also, it has a much more modern and streamlined interface. Like the map control is a lot better. Moving assets around I find to be much easier, as well as how fast you can add dynamic lighting to something. Also, as well, like it has paid and free options, with free being, good enough for running any kind of like homebrew campaign, just adding maps, moving tokens around, and doing stuff. They don't have any official partnered Wizards modules. They do have some homebrew ones that you can purchase and run on them, and as well as a paid monthly subscription for a ton of pre-made assets, which is nice. But if you have your own already, you don't really need that as much.
Yeah, like, as a player, I like Astral. As a DM, I think Roll 20 just because that's what I'm comfortable with. But as a player, like Astral does kind of have that modern feel UI. It does look a little better. I have had some technical issues with it in terms of it not loading if I have certain Chrome settings on. Where it's like if I have that setting on, streaming Discord movies doesn't work. If I have the setting off, then Astral doesn't work. So I keep
Yeah.
having to swap back and forth. But overall, I think Astral's pretty impressive, at least from the player perspective. I'm not sure from the DM perspective.
Yeah, for sure. From a player perspective, it's really fun to use. I enjoy using it, I think, a little bit more than I enjoy DMing or playing through Roll20. It's just, it looks like it was built in the last 5 to 10 years because it was.
Have you DM'd on Astral, Mike?
Just one shot on Astral, and it was fun. I use Roll20 because I have all the paid assets there, so I have way more stuff to play with.
Yeah, that's fair. My Astral experience is just as a player. I haven't DM'd on it, so maybe I'll try to spin up a sample game and play around with it. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
What other options we have? I guess like Fantasy Grounds, Arkenforge, a few more we got to get through. So Fantasy Grounds, I personally don't use it. Chris, I think you use Fantasy Grounds.
Yeah, so our friend Matt has DM'd a game for quite some time in Fantasy Grounds. I would say this one gets definitely some points for, although being a little bit dated in its UI, which has been updated that I haven't played on. They just launched their Unity version last year. But based on the old one, it's really great for having everything pre-made a module. Like it manages so much stuff for you. Like you can select targets in an AoE spell, and it'll roll their deck saves, apply the damage appropriately, and even know if they're resistant to that damage type and deal with all that for you. Which makes fireballing a group of like a bunch of things and half of them have fire resistance so much less of a headache for everybody involved. So like spellcasting, like the auto tracking of like health and damage and targeting things is super useful. Being able to like actually cast Bless in your party, and Bless will just apply until it drops. It auto rolls con saves and concentration spells. Stuff like that really makes combat a lot more streamlined, which is one of my favorite features of it.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
then you don't get the whole like, hey, roll your bless, hey, roll your bless, which as a cleric is a very fun thing to do.
We have different ideas of fun.
I was trying to be a little sarcastic there, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll second that. Like playing in the Fantasy Grounds game is fantastic as a player, being able to just target things and then hit cast on a spell and have it do all of the rolling and like figure everything out and apply resistances and take into account conditions. It's the most well-rounded combat handling that I've seen of any VTT for sure. That said, actually programming anything that's remotely like custom in it sucks. It uses like its own proprietary way of doing things, and you have to like crazily customize all of your attacks if you want to do stuff. So that portion of it could use some work, but the actual combat handling is just
Yeah, for
next
sure.
level.
As much as it does do a lot of stuff, when you find the stuff it doesn't do, it can be a bit of a pain to try to like smash its different pieces together to recreate other effects. So that can be a little bit irritating.
Yeah, and like I have spent many an hour working through all of the homebrew settings on D&D Beyond, and there's no way to do anything with Fantasy Grounds with D&D Beyond, which is a kind of a deal breaker for me as both a player and a DM.
Yeah, and we'll chat about D&D Beyond in a second, which is, D&D Beyond is obviously fantastic. But in terms of other VTTs as well, Chris, I know you've done some like projection stuff with another VTT.
Yeah, Arca 4 is kind of interesting because it's a little bit of a cross between the VTT and the real life, because I use it for in-person games projected onto a whiteboard, uh, but it functions as a VTT in the sense that I have my own screen that I control as a DM, and I reveal the map, control light sources, time of day, the vision on it, And that was really interesting because it lets me have much larger maps, more detailed maps than I'd be able to do with traditional paper styles. Because, I can have multi level fortresses, bring my characters up and down floors, have maps so big that I use marker tokens to remember where people are. And, like, they're way across a giant battlefield that I can, like, zoom out of to give a sense of scale. Something that actually lets you really feel like Meteor Swarm is being cast from a acceptable distance. It's like, hey, what's that guy doing a mile away? So it has a lot of strengths to be able to do fun stuff with like controlling the map on the table like that. And it as a DM, it's also super useful to set mood. If like my players want to come back at nighttime, I can actually just make it nighttime and have like realistic light sources, so
Yeah.
it'll look appropriate. Not to mention it has a phenomenal audio engine in it for background music and soundscapes.
Yeah, the background music stuff is crazy, crazy cool. Like when a token hits a certain spot, it triggers sound effects that scare the hell out of us at the table, and also can confirm that casting Meteor Swarm has been the most satisfying on that because we got to see the grand scale of what the camp looked like before and after getting Meteor Swarmed, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's really cool. I haven't had a chance to experience that, but I might have to, throw Chris a few 20s and be like, "Hey, don't bring your projector over. We're not playing D&D, I promise." And then just sucker him into running a game for me and some friends. But yeah, I mean, I think that kind of covers some of the top ones. I think VTTs are, there's new ones coming out all the time, and I guess I'll make an honorable mention and then a dishonorable mention because I know Mike, you're gonna fight me on it. So honorable mention. I have heard whispers of D&D Beyond working on a VTT, and D&D Beyond makes some really cool stuff for encounters and character builders, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, like we said. But I'm really excited if they're building a VTT because their tools are great. So if they do a VTT, I think they're gonna do it right.
Yeah, I mean they've been hiring a ton recently, specifically people in that realm of technology. So it makes sense to me that that is what they're doing next, especially with the stuff that was announced at Celebration.
Yeah, for sure. Chris, how do you feel about that? Like, I know you run stuff on D&D Beyond, or like you have your character sheets there and you have campaigns there, and
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, like they've really positioned themselves as being like sort of the forefront of D&D material to get it online for your character sheet stuff. So if they had uh, a VTT that everything else folded into, it really, honestly, if they do it right, they could knock it out of the park.
so in the software biz, like in the software industry, we call that not a piece of software, we call that a solution. Like they are placing themselves to be the D&D solution. Like you need a VTT, we have it. You need character sheets, we have it. You need encounter builders, we have it. And you know, if they do things right, I could see, in a few years time where D&D Beyond is your D&D resource period.
Yeah, I mean it's already basically the one-stop shop. Like some people use VTTs for things, but we'll talk about it in a little bit. Almost everybody builds their characters or has a copy of their character in D&D Beyond and uses that with whatever VTT they're using.
For
So
sure. And just a little note of celebration, I did cough up the 3.99 a month or whatever it is to not have to delete my characters anymore.
there
So
you go.
they have earned my subscription. But yeah, that's my honorable mention, but let's go to my dishonorable one, and I'm just going to say two words and then I'm going to let you two rant, I guess. Google spreadsheet.
Yeah, no. There are free options for VTTs. There's zero reason to use it. I
I've
know
heard it.
people have done it. I know they've done it, but just because you can't ask yourself if you should do something, not if you can do something.
I mean, Mike, as a DM, you should do whatever makes you happy. But yeah, maybe Google Spreadsheet won't make you happy. But I've heard stories of people running a game in Google Spreadsheet. They share a spreadsheet, and they just you have your spreadsheet and you have your cells and rows because that's really all the grid is, anyways, right? Like a map grid.
Yeah.
And they just put like C1, C2, C3, and that's like center one, center two, center
Oh
three, and
yeah,
then
you could
yeah.
100% do it. Nobody's debating that it's possible. It's just whether or not you should do it, and you shouldn't.
Exactly. It's like finding out that someone eats their hot dogs with a spoon covered in mayonnaise. It's like, yes, that's a way to eat a hot dog, but there's a lot better ways to do it that aren't so messy.
Yeah, my girlfriend eats rice with a spoon, and I find that like maybe that's okay. I guess I find it weird. Do you eat rice with a fork or a spoon?
A
Depends on
fork.
what's with the rice.
Oh, really? Okay. I've always eaten rice with a fork, but anyways. I digress a bit, but yeah, that's our honorable and dishonorable mention, I guess. And there are other ones like there's Tabletop Simulator, and if you just Google virtual tabletops, play around with them, and
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
there's a
lot
ton
coming
of
up. These are just
options.
some of the ones that we have the most experience with to comment on.
Yeah, for sure. I beta tested Foundry as well, which was kind of cool. I think it has a lot of potential, but there's a lot of gaps there still. So not something I would recommend anybody use yet.
yeah, and if you're feeling super super generous and super you want to support the creatives in the world, there are probably some VTT Kickstarters out there. So take a look at that, and if there are ones that you get super excited about, feel free to kind of back those creators and help them achieve. Because if they make a good product, then everybody wins, and we all have smoother and more fun games, both as
Yeah, for
DMs
sure.
and players.
Or maybe they'll do well and fandom will buy them and we'll get a D&D Beyond VTT faster.
Yeah, that might work.
Yeah,
Right. Well, I mean, that's a pretty little, like a good kind of dive into VTTs, and I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of cast my vote. Um, I do like Astral. I think the UI is pretty sleek. I haven't DM'd on it yet, so because of that, I think I'm gonna go with Roll20. It does take a little bit to get used to, like I said, but you can be up and running a game in a few hours. Um, so yeah, if you're looking to get into it and you're a new DM, don't be too intimidated by Roll20. They have a cute little tutorial at the beginning that kind of walks you through the different things you can do. So
Yeah, I'm going to say mine's going for Astral as someone who does pretty much only homebrew stuff. It has all the features I need and it's super easy to use. So that's definitely my VTT of choice, with the exception of in person using Arkenforge for projection.
for sure. As a player, I feel Astral, I have more experience with that now and I like it. As a DM, I'm going to stick with Roll20 just because of how well it integrates with Wizards stuff right now. I'm lazy. Like, most of the stuff I'm doing right now is homebrew, but this started off because I was very easily able to grab the module for Curse of Strahd and not have to set up everything myself. So, yeah, I'm gonna go with Roll20 just because it integrates with everything really well. It's been around for a long time. It's the kind of tried, tested, and true VTC for now.
sounds good. Apart from VTTs, let's talk about some other DM tools. So, character sheets, and we've kind of mentioned D&D Beyond, and maybe one of you guys wants to chat about it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, D&D Beyond for me is the kind of be all end all. Like Wizards stuff releases there within like a week or whatever of the books coming out. All of the UA that they want to test out is all there. So if you are like into the cutting edge stuff of D&D and you want to take a look at new classes, new class features, new spells, all of that stuff, it'll all be on D&D Beyond within 2 weeks of it hitting UA. So before anything is ever fully released, it'll be accessible to you there. So that's why I like it. I have like fucking 60 characters made at this point that are just sitting there waiting for random one shots and whatnot.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. As soon as things are released, they become available very shortly after on D&D Beyond. And as a DM, if you do have one of their upper plans, when you buy a source book, you do have the option to share it with your players. So if your players are using this tool for free, they may only have certain options, like only Life Cleric, I believe, is the free version. But if you want them to have access to other classes, you can buy those source books and share them with your players in the campaign. So in D&D Beyond, it's a character sheet management tool, campaign management tool, encounter management tool that lets you build out encounters as well. But I think content sharing is really cool because as a DM or as a group, you guys can kind of pitch in money together and buy a source book and content share that with your players. And I think that's pretty cool. We have access to a lot of stuff, or I have access to a lot of stuff because of Mike and Chris.
Yeah,
Um,
I bit the bullet and bought the legendary bundle, which has all of the books in it recently. So
yeah,
I share all that through all my campaigns.
yeah, and like, please don't make me seem like a D&D digger. I have bought you a few of the, I have
No,
bought you a few
absolutely,
books.
absolutely. My legendary bundle
Yeah,
was cheaper because you have bought me a couple of books. You're not wrong.
there you go, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, D&D Beyond, what's your experience with it? You like it? You don't like it?
Yeah, honestly, it's pretty great. It's phenomenal. Like its encounter builder has been super useful to me when I'm running multiple encounters throughout an evening. Just putting all the enemies into them, labeling them, and just having them ready throughout the fight. I found it super useful for organization. Uh, In terms of character sheets, obviously, it's best in class for that. Step-by-step character creation, all the spells can be looked up at an instant. Uh, and yeah, especially with the use of other tools like Beyond 20, which we'll talk about, it can further improve its usability. But yeah, definitely in terms of a single resource for information, character sheet creation, encounters, like there's honestly nothing else like it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Beyond 20 is the thing that really makes this crazy. There's an extension for Chrome for those that don't know it. If you don't use it right now and you're using any of the VTTs we've talked about, I think except for Fantasy Grounds, they integrate with D&D Beyond through this Chrome extension called Beyond 20. So as long as your character is named the same thing in your VTT, uh, you can just hit a button in D&D Beyond and it'll roll through to the VTT for you. So you don't have to manage your character multiple places. And as a DM, when you use the encounter builder on D&D Beyond, you can roll as any monster that you want and it throws it through to you in a whisper so you can see what the roll is, what the damage is, anything that you want to roll for any character, any creature from any sheet from D&D Beyond, you can have in whatever VTT you're using.
Yeah, so I mean, like that kind of covers D&D Beyond, Beyond 20. They do kind of go hand in hand. You don't necessarily need Beyond 20, but oh my God, does it make life easier? And I guess your other option, character sheet wise and campaign management, is good old paper. Like if your characters want to have paper sheets, if your PCs want to have paper character sheets, I think that's fine. I think it makes life harder. I would just suggest D&D Beyond and Beyond 20. But hey, I mean, I trust my players, and I'm okay with them rolling physical dice or having paper sheets and tracking their stuff that way.
Yeah, 100%. Like people can use whatever they want to use to track their character. I find D&D Beyond easier just because it does have that integration. But if you want to use paper, if you want to roll your physical dice, feel free to do that. It's really up to you and what you want with your table. I find that using D&D Beyond with Beyond 20 into the VTT adds suspense to things because players all see the roll at the same time. Like you can all react to stuff at the same time. You don't have to like wait for a player to roll their dice and then say what they got.
Yeah, I agree. Sharing that moment is really really cool, and I think it's exciting. Like, or even as a DM rolling in the VTT, and like, oh, this person needs to make a 19 whiz save, or they're commanded to do something, and having your party see that they got an 18 or a 17 or a 2, it's fun, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd really recommend going the non-paper route here. Um, and yeah, I think one other thing that makes their character sheets going the non-paper route better for you as a DM is in our previous episode of Tears Court, we talked about whether it's fair for DM to know the player's stats and know the player's capabilities. And I think the consensus there was that can be a tool to be a good DM. If you know your player speaks Abyssal, put an Abyssal altar somewhere with some scratched Abyssal, and that player will feel like, hey, no one else knows Abyssal, and I was able to read this. It's a moment for them, right? Even if it's small, it's something like, hey, I did this thing that no one else can do and no one else understands. So, having it all in D&D Beyond lets you access it.
Yeah, for sure. There definitely is a slight nostalgic attachment to having like the actual character sheet as like a physical record of your character. But I do think they're definitely on their way out. Like in the long running campaign of running for like, gosh, it's all like 5 years now. We all started off paper, books, looking things up. But we've pretty much all transitioned to just using D&D Beyond off laptops and phones that we brought because it's so much faster. Like there's no more of like if there's a question about what to do for leveling or the rules stuff, it's all just kind of there and we know it. It's really streamlines like actually playing the game rather than, consulting the tomes.
Not to mention more table space for popcorn and snacks and stuff. Because like you come with a PHB and a DMG, and your table's full of books sometimes. And I actually did bring a paper sheet. I went to the park to go play with the other group, and we went to the park to go play outside on the previous Sunday. And my phone was at like 30%, so I'm like, I'm gonna print out my character sheet. So I did go there with a paper sheet, but usually, yeah, you got it all in the palm of your hand in your phone or your tablet. So really
Yeah.
convenient.
Another throwback to the Tears Court episode is if you don't have a paper sheet, there's nothing for your bad DM to tear up when they kill you.
I was thinking about that. but going back to Tears Court, if they do decide to grab your phone and smash it, I think you're in a worse position.
Fair enough.
We all signed the form.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think like from running games online, those are kind of the major tools. Um, I guess there's one more that Chris you had brought up in previous conversation, which was generators, and I didn't even think of this, but super useful.
Oh, yes, that's right. I tend to use a lot of random generators when I'm planning games. And I think this applies to people who do pre-made or homebrew for all sorts of things. I would say there are two I use constantly. First of all, fantasy name generators, just to get all those delightful NPC names that aren't just like Bobbert, Robert, and Tobbert, because I run out of them. And also, who can come up with several dwarven names on the spot that aren't just from Lord of the Rings? Uh, and the other one I use is Donjon, which is just an all-around generator for everything D&D that is shockingly useful.
Yeah,
There is so
it's
much on
incredible.
there.
There's so much on there. Yeah, it's nuts. I use both of them constantly. That and the 5e Magic Shop.
I've
Oh, that one too.
Chris has mentioned Donjon to me before, and I think there was one part where you could like generate encounters based on terrain type. So if you put like forest, it'll generate you a forest encounter. But when I was looking through this, there are some really interesting generators like random dungeon generator, random generator, which just generates a bunch of random stuff, loot, encounter, um, weird fiction. So let's like weird name generator, Albert Zimmer, Edgar Clinton, Nolan
Yeah,
Ingalls, Henry Thornton. Like, it's just
literally anything you can think of that you would have to make up on the spot, you don't have to if you go to this website. It will do it for you.
yeah, there's some really cool ones. I think what was the other one we were looking at? I know we were looking at the Magic
Uh,
Shop generator.
I know on Donjon the weird magic item generator is one I use all the time.
Yeah, I thought the site was really cool. There's so much on here, and I think generators are good for two things. Number one, yeah, they're good for like, oh, I need a list of names, and I'm going to generate a bunch. I'm going to keep them with me, and that's great. But I also think they're good for inspiration. Like, if you're going to one of these generators and like fantasy calendar generator, and it's talking about eclipse of moon 3 and evening stars and shooting stars on certain days, like having that calendar is kind of a cool like having a campaign based around the calendar and the changing of time seems cool. And I mean, some of these generators can give you inspiration for things like that, right?
I just pulled up the fantasy calendar, and looks like it's going to be bad towards the end of the month. The 21st and 23rd, both Fireball. It's
Oh no.
pretty much back to back.
What is it, Fireball the drink, or is it Fireball like from the heavens?
I think it's from the heavens. It's a
Oh,
bad
okay,
one.
because if it was the
Oh,
drink, that's not bad.
the 21st I'm not sure about, but the 23rd we're actually playing that in-person game. So
Yeah,
you
double
might just
fireballs.
die. Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, there's like random dungeon generator, which gives you like an entire map. Random generator, which generates like there's traps in here. There's pickpocket loot. So if you pickpocket an NPC, you might get 41 GP in a letter of correspondence, or you might get a list of people, a malachite, and some hardtack.
Yeah. Basically, if there's something that your players want to do and you're like, I don't know how to do this, there's probably a generator to help you figure out what the outcome should be.
Yeah, we'll link this in the show notes because it does have a weird address. Because it is donjon.bin.sh.
Yeah, so that's donjon.bin.sh. But yeah, definitely check the show notes, like Chris said. This site's amazing. It's super
Yeah,
cool.
and Mike did mention it. The one thing I do use like a separate generator for is the 5e Magic Shop generator. Because Donjon has one, but it doesn't include prices for it. The reason I like this shop is it bases it off of the same magic item prices list, which essentially gets rid of the wiggle room of like there are thousands to tens of thousands of gold in the pricing ranges of magic items. And sometimes it'd be kind of hard to be like, well, is this thing worth 500 gold or is it worth like 10,000 gold? It's a big spectrum.
Yeah, and somebody actually took the time to go look at what they think those prices should be based on like game impact, right?
Yeah, essentially someone just went through on a forum and it's been updated throughout as new magic items go on and just had like a good ballpark guess based on how impactful these items are. And essentially then it generates them for you in a store and allows you to set a markup or a discount based on where they are, as well as having some preset things for you to be like, okay, my players are in a large town. It'll give you a rough idea of like how many of each rarity of an item will be in there and give you that store.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I want somebody to do that with crafting, because I still don't feel that crafting is in a decent place. I know as an artificer, once you hit like level 6 or 7, crafting does become a little easier. But I've always found the crafting rules in the D&D source books to be a little like there's very little I guess it depends on your world, but I feel like there's very little reason to ever craft a healing potion. But I guess that depends on the availability. I don't
It
know.
depends on availability. It depends on like how high the magic is in your world, and I think the crafting rules are really based around long running, slower, lower magic campaigns. The way that like the Gygaxian way of running D&D, which isn't the way that a lot of us run now. So I feel like there's definitely some room for improvement on the crafting rules for 5e.
Yeah, I used to, and I really like this concept. I think I've talked about it before, and this didn't come up. But one DM tool you can have is, making your own tools. One of those tools could be a spreadsheet that delegates how players can use quote unquote downtime days. And this was actually something that was done on a previous D&D server I was on Discord, where based on your adventuring, you'd earn downtime days. So, if you were on a week-long adventure or a week-long quest, you'd have a day or two of rest and you'd earn those. And then there were various crafting that was like the gold was lower, but you had to use downtime days as a currency. So
Mm-hmm.
like crafting a healing potion might be 2 downtime days plus whatever 25 gold, or
Yeah.
it was cheaper, and it actually made crafting like a more viable thing in the world. So I really like that idea. And I'm sure there's some crafting generators out there you can look up, but even having your own tools and spreadsheets like that could be a useful reference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think roll tables are another thing we haven't really talked about that I use pretty extensively, and most of the pre-mades actually use extensively as well.
What is a roll table?
It's kind of what it sounds like. It's a table of things that are results based on a roll. So you get to a specific area on a map, and I roll a d20. If it's an 18 through 20, there's an encounter. And then I roll another d20, and that determines what that encounter is. So you can have a list of these things ready and prepared, and then your players might run into them when they get to specific areas in a world, or when they encounter like specific time frames within a world. Like for every week, you might get an encounter when you have downtime or something like that. So it's a way of just having a bunch of like pre-made things that happen by chance.
Yeah, I really like roll tables as well. I think they're a way to be creative without being creative. Like you can put some initial work into the creativity of a roll table, but then when you actually need to pull from that roll table, you roll your d6 or your d20, and the world's kind of your oyster here. For example, you could have a roll table to determine what kind of boxers the bartender has on. You know, you roll a 1, he has black boxers on. You roll a 6, he has white boxers with hearts on them. Like you can make roll tables for absolutely anything, and they're super useful throughout a campaign.
I'd agree. I use a ton of roll tables. In my current like jungle expedition one, I have one for fishing, one for foraging, another one for things that happen if you drop to 0 hit points to get permanent injuries.
So can I say that the thing that roll tables adds to your campaign is randomness, flair, and unexpected fun. And the reason, sorry, Chris, for jumping in, but the reason I jumped in was I remember playing a game where I guested on one of your games, Chris. And during downtime, I think it was Grom, or one of the guys
Glorm.
went, Glorm? I think Glorm went fishing. And Glorm ended up catching out of the water. He caught this squirrel or something. Like there was something in the water that he caught. And he pulled this creature out, and the creature like sat beside him and then just looked up at him with cute eyes and stuff. And Glorm was like, like fed him, and like as a player, what's the player's name there?
That's Josh.
Josh. I'm pretty sure it was Glorm, but he was so happy to interact with this little creature. And after the interaction, the creature just like ran away or walked away. But it was this like 10 minutes of really fun, like whimsical, like, oh, this
And I
cute
will
little
say
creature
he
popped
wasn't
up.
fishing for that. That wasn't the foraging table. He did not pull a squirrel out of the water. It
Oh,
was
I thought he
some
pulled something out of the
no, no, no.
water.
It was just his general foraging. He just found the small furry thing. I forget what it was. Something oddly exotic, like an eye or something.
Yeah, the last time that somebody fished anything out of the water, it turned out to be a fucking aboleth. So
Oh, the last time I fished something out of the water, it turned out to be a big ass fish that had a what was it? A headband of street fighting, a headband of road combat, and it would let you as a monk make multiple unarmed attacks, and then at 10 unarmed attacks you could basically like Hadouken. It was one of Chris's items, and it was super cool. Yeah, I mean, like, those tables kind of allow for these pseudo random little, fun encounters, and you don't know what's going to happen from the player perspective. Like, you don't know how they're going to react to that event, right? So that's fun.
Yeah, they're honestly great. I usually get a lot of them. There's a subreddit called D100 where people post, and also what's really fun is they collectively build D100 tables for stuff. And you can find a lot of fun stuff on there. And it's really great to see like these community made lists, people generating just like random roll tables of 100, just something.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the weird random generator on Donjon. So, Grim Fates, stabbed to death by a degenerate scientist, brain removed by a malevolent occultist, mind consumed by fear and panic. I think I suffer that fate currently
yeah,
in
that's just
IRL.
all of us right now, I think.
But yeah, I love these generators. So,
I think generators can be used for both, but I think that basically covers online tools, right? Like there's nothing else that you would need to use online. You've got your VTT, your character sheets, your generators for things that you can't think of. If there's any other online tools you really need, right? What about in person?
yeah, I mean, like, one thing I'd add to that online as a last note is, like, any other media. Like, pull inspiration from things you're watching on Netflix, pull inspiration from other D&D games, pull inspiration from, you know, like, almost any media you consume, or maybe you see a tweet that's really interesting and you kind of think of, like, how can I incorporate something like that into the world, right? So, yeah, but in terms of real life, I mean, one of my favorite at the table tools is little wooden cubes, like 1 by 1 by 1 inch wooden cubes. You can get them at the dollar store for like $1. And the reason I like these are, as a starting DM, they're cheap and they just work as markers for anything. I write con on one, I write 5 on the other to represent like 5 foot elevation. So, if you're flying 5 feet in the air, I'll put a wooden cube with a 5 under you. Use it to represent enemies. So I have cubes that are marked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll just tell the thing, okay, 1 is an orc, 2 is an orc, 3 is an orc, 4 is an orc, 5 is an orc leader, and then I'll have, my little whiteboard and just tracking their HP and initiative, just based on that. Cube 1, cube 2, cube 3, cube 4.
Yeah, totally. They're like a great like agnostic tool for just indicating where things are in your world.
They're so versatile. Like enemy markers or even like terrain. If you want to like have a cave, you could just put a cube on the map, be like, this is the cave. um yeah, they're just so versatile. I think they should be in almost any DM's kind of DM bag.
Yeah, I use them a lot myself. I found like a colored set of them where they came in like several different like primary colors, and I found it was really useful for large encounters with multiple enemy types. We're like, okay, like blue guys are archers, the green guys are melee with like heavy armor, and the yellow ones are like lighter skirmishers. Just to kind of like easily visualize 3 different types of enemies and like but a large group of them.
Yeah, I just thought of this, but if you're consistent with that, your players, you don't even have to tell your players. You can set up a map and be like, here's some orc captains. There, you meet some orc captains, some archers, and some lightly armored kind of roguish types, and your players will just know, like, okay, yeah, the blue ones are heavily armored. So that's kind of cool. I haven't thought about that from like a long running point of view.
Yeah, another thing I also use them for is I combine them with another little workaround. Instead of having miniatures, is I will print off a sheet of just cardstock that I, in some photo editing software, I make like a 1 by 2 grid and just drag in various assets to the appropriate size I need of just from D&D Beyond or just image searches and stuff. And I just use a glue stick and I just pop them onto one of those little cubes to get them to stand up and use those instead. And you can just take the pictures right off afterwards. It barely sticks on. It's a glue stick, and you can
Yeah.
use them again.
Yeah, and while the cubes are a good representation of like space, they're nowhere near as terrifying as the like giant skittering horrors that Chris prints off to stick to them. So it definitely gives the game a little bit more, with a little bit more effort, just being able to have a better visual representation of what you're fighting against.
And again, this is like a super low cost thing that anyone can do. All you need is a printer or a print store near you that can get it done, which is all I have to do because I've given up on owning a printer that works for more than 2 months.
Yeah, and you did mention minis or miniatures in there, and miniatures are really fun as a DM. They can add up price wise. However, there are different Kickstarters and different things like that where for like $50 you get a whole bunch of miniatures, and having those with you is always fun for like random encounters and things like that. And they can also inspire some of your encounters. Like I had these little spider miniatures, and what color do you paint them? Black, right? I decided to paint them blue with kind of white traces and like white kind of tips of their legs. And that kind of inspired me to think about like some sort of winter adventure or some sort of ice cavern with these spiders casting ice knife and things like that.
Yeah.
So minis as a tool and as inspiration, like Chris, have you ever like found a mini in a store and been like, that mini is so cool, I want to write something just for that mini?
I definitely have done that and actually seeked out deliberately because you can get minis in several ways. You can get them, unpainted, paint them yourself. You can find them pre-painted, and also you can get these like booster sets that are just like 5 or 6 random minis, and you don't know what they are. They come from like random like collections that are brought out. Usually, before I do an in-person like full campaign weekend, I'll just buy one of those boxes and try to include as many things that are inside it as possible, and just like shove them into the story somehow. And I find that's a really fun thing to do. Like one time, I got a swarm of ants, so I just had the players get sticky and get swarmed with ants. Because like, guess who's got a token for a swarm of ants?
Yeah, so Toronto D&D does giveaways for DMs, and I've won a couple of times, and one of them was a collection of like anthropomorphic animals. So I wrote a one shot that was essentially like Madagascar, with the end boss being like a giant elephant man that I had spent the time to paint and put together. So you can definitely like build adventures around minis. But like Scott said, they do get costly. You don't need them. There are other ways you can represent things, but minis are definitely a fun time sink as well. If you get into painting them, it's really really fun.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll probably have an upcoming episode if you're interested in painting minis. We'll probably give you a little, pardon the pun, but a little primer on it. And yeah, it'll just it's a fun pastime. I really enjoy putting on, the Witcher soundtrack and just painting minis. It's very relaxing. But minis don't have to cost $5 each. They don't have to cost $10 each. WizKids makes some really cool stuff. I believe it's WizKids. You can just Amazon it. There are some $5, $10 minis that are fantastic. But even the dollar store,
I would say even better than Amazon. It go to your local game store, get it from there.
Yeah,
yeah, that
hundred
works
percent.
too.
Stores are back open. Go support them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like one thing too is I've actually used things from the dollar store. I remember when running one of my first games for Black Strike, one of the minis I used was I went to the dollar store and for like $2 I bought a little kids pack of jungle animals and or like assorted kind of animals, and one of them was a wolf. And in that adventure, they fought, or it was a training session with Aegis and his wolf, and that wolf was one of my minis, and it was 10 times bigger than any other mini at the table. But I think that added to it this huge wolf coming down, and it did have like it had enlarged cast on it and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, even something like that, it's just a stand-in, right? It's just a representation of something for your players.
I know another thing that's quite popular is you can use Lego as miniatures. They're highly customizable. There's a lot of figures, and most of us have a large bin of it sitting around somewhere or at our parents' house.
I've never heard of that, but yeah, that's
Oh, absolutely. I have like a Lego Harry Potter set that I pulled a bunch of figures out of for a game with my niece and nephew.
yeah. I mean, there's a few other things that I think as a DM, keeping on you uh, is essential. I mentioned a whiteboard. I like to have a little erasable whiteboard in my hand, where I can track things like initiative order and my enemy's current health, and I just basically use it for things like uh, keeping the player's AC so that I can describe when they get hit, as opposed to being like, "Hey, does a 12 hit?" Where I can just be like, "Oh, they swing their axe and it sinks into your armor but does no damage, right? And so whiteboard and markers definitely gets a plus from me.
Yeah, I keep one on myself as well for the same reasons. Just writing down like useful information, keeping track of combat, uh, keeping track of enemy health is super useful because you just write their names down, just like erase it and update their health, and just little boxes on there. It's just super useful. That's something you could just write down those quick little things of in the heat of combat and be able to just wipe it away. You don't have to worry about paper and pencils and stuff.
Yeah, I
Yeah, for
don't
sure.
I don't use that for like any notes and stuff. Usually a lot of my notes I'll take on my phone or like my pre-writtens or my homebrew stuff. I'll generally just G drive stuff and work on it, when I'm home or if I'm on the bus, I'll kind of G drive stuff and work on docs there. But in terms of running the game and tracking things like turn order and AC and health of 4 or 5 enemies, a little whiteboard and erasable marker is super useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I will one up that and say have a magnetic whiteboard if you can, so you can use like a magnet to track initiative. I think Chris, you do this,
Yeah.
and the DM screens that I like make, the like woodworking ones, have magnetic screens built into the back of them as well, so you can track initiative and stuff like that.
Yeah, so if you're thinking like if you're trying to picture that, like how does that work? Like you just write the names of your turn order and the little magnet's just sticking next to the person's current turn. And when they
Yeah,
take their turn, you slide the magnet down. But yeah, that's super useful. I never really thought about that. I usually just put a check and then erase it, but the magnet is much more convenient.
yeah, for sure.
All right, let's go on to two more tools um, that, for me, kind of go together because we're going to talk about Chris's map technique, which I love, and you've probably heard me talk about before. But dice, it's always good to have extra dice. People run late, people have jobs. Sometimes they forget their dice a lot.
Also, as a DM, you generally need more than one set of dice.
Yeah, you need like at least what 40 d6s if you want to cast a meteor swarm on people. So
Yeah,
minimum
so
that amount.
start building up to that. That should be your goal is to cast a meteor swarm on people. But and then graph paper. And how do these two go together? Graph paper is super useful for kind of impromptu maps, or even just you might have the map drawn out on your notes, and you want to then show this to players, and you could lay out graph paper and kind of draw out your map on it. One really cool dynamic map generation technique that Chris taught me is grab a bunch of dice, d4s, d6s, d8s, and tell your players d4s are trees, d6s are big holes that sink into God knows where, d8s are caverns, and d10 are alligators. And make an area with the marker on the graph paper, roll those dice, let them fall wherever they may, and then kind of, where the alligators are, you can put wooden cubes or minis. Where the holes are, you can kind of draw circles around the dice to represent like difficult terrain or falling down. And that kind of lets you like quickly draw up a map. And I've used it before at the table, and it takes like a minute, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's like a great real-time procedurally generated map for a game. It's great.
Yeah, and it's cool because your players watch it come to life. So your players are watching the dice roll, and like, okay, there's a tree there, there's a tree there, there's swampland here, and it's super cool. So you throw your dice, draw stuff out, take the dice off, you have a sweet map to work with.
Yeah, when your players go off the rails and do something you're not expecting, they can watch you like just pull an encounter right out of your ass. It's great.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that kind of leads us to some like, what are tools for generating environments or terrains or like other than like that dice technique for maps? What are tools you guys use for environments?
So when I'm running in person, other than the Arc and Forge that I mentioned before, I also both make and use a lot of just custom maps I find online. And uh, so I'll say, first of all, when I make them, I use Dungeon Painter Studio. It's just a simple little vector tile based thing that lets you just draw up some pretty nice looking maps really quickly. And then I just get those printed out on standard letter side paper and just put those together into a complete map on the table.
Do you guys make any like I guess terrain minis? I don't know what you call them. I guess do you make any terrain?
Yeah, I have used it several times. I had a neat little system where I got a friend of mine to make me some like little 1 inch wooden pillars that go on a map, and then you essentially just drop wall pieces into them that are just pieces of card that fit into little slots, and you can make little multi-story buildings and stuff like that. as well as I also just out of the regular old like wall insulation styrofoam, I made just some little like joiner pieces, which is like some small walls, stairs, and bridges just out of stone, which just 1 inch size like blocks. Essentially, you can just stack, build, and move around a map to add just a little bit of verticality.
Yeah, for sure. And like I haven't been as creative as Chris has been with it, but I did support a Kickstarter called Dungeons and Lasers, which I think is on their third iteration now. But I have the original iteration, and it's all like injection molded plastic terrain, so you can build out rooms into a custom dungeon. And I think there's like 16 different rooms you can arrange in any way you want, so you can stack them one on top of the other. It came with a bunch of minis, and it came with like stairs and pillars and chests and tables and all kinds of stuff to kind of really set the mood for an encounter.
I think that's a pretty extensive list when it comes to running at the table. Is there anything that you guys feel we've missed or
Pencils.
ah oh
Always
yeah.
bring
100%.
extra pencils and erasers. I play in a game with people who are adults with jobs and families, and somehow I still have to hand out a good 5 or 6 pencils every weekend.
I cannot tell you the last time I used a pencil at work, Chris. My work is done on a laptop, and I don't even know if I own a pencil anymore. So
Well, that's why I travel with a pencil case full of a good 20 or so mechanical pencils and some good erasers.
you are a good boy.
All right, and with that, I think that's it for this week. Join us next week where we'll talk about game environments and atmosphere and how they can really add to a game. As always, if you need to slide to a DM's, you can DM us on Insta, Twitter, or Facebook at DMs Discuss, or catch us via email at dmsdiscuss@gmail.com.
And you don't need to commune with your deity to find out when we have new episodes. Subscribe to us in your favorite podcatcher app to be notified whenever we drop a new episode.
We will be heading into some dark, scary, and fun environments on our next episode. Make sure you get those spell slots back on your long rest.